Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to kick off Elevate this morning and talk with all of you about the flywheel effect of feedback loops. I was a competitive swimmer growing up, and when I first started competing in swim meets, my coach instructed me to come to a coach after every event and get feedback. I did this diligently. I listened, I took the feedback, I applied it to my practices and my next race, and every meet I got faster. I dutifully continued doing this from the time I was a beginning swimmer all the way until I was a nationally ranked collegiate athlete. And you know what was interesting? The feedback just got better and better. When coaches knew that I was going to go come and talk with them after each race, they really paid attention to my race. They thought about what things I was doing well and what improvements I could make in my next race. And then I was able to take those tips and apply them every time I got into the pool. There was no perfect swim. It was just a continual, infinite game of what I could do to go faster and faster. And I loved it. There's a flywheel effect to feedback. Jim Collins talks about the concept of flywheels in his book, Good to Great. A flywheel is a rotating mechanical device used to store energy. A few things interesting about flywheels. One, they're really hard to start. It can take a lot of effort just to get things moving. Two, once you get it going though, it just gets easier and easier and it gets faster and faster. And three, once it really starts spinning, it's hard to stop. It really takes little effort to continue. Just like in my story about swimming, feedback is part of every flywheel that I see in great companies and great teams that I've worked. But feedback does not always come naturally. People can be really awkward at asking or receiving feedback, or they could just want to hide it from it. But it is an important part of every flywheel that I've seen, and it can be a flywheel into itself if you construct the right feedback loops across your organization. So I'm going to talk about 4 feedback loops that I see showing up in tech orgs that get better and better the more you support them. The first is product feedback loops. Second, customer feedback loops. Third, team feedback loops. And finally, individual feedback loops. Each of these feedback loops is really important into itself, but if you have these all working together, they really reinforce each other and they become an even larger flywheel, and they help make your team and your company better. First, I'm going to start with product feedback loops. One of the best things that we can do as a technology leader is to get product feedback faster. And the way we can do that is we can ship faster. When you ship something, you can get users using your product. They can give you feedback on what they like and what they don't like, and then you can make changes and add features to help you get more customers. Those more customers then give you feedback, and the flywheel really begins. If you don't have enough customers, you can't get the flywheel moving. If you don't listen to customers, they will stop giving feedback and the flywheel will slip. And if you don't make changes quickly enough, the flywheel just doesn't build momentum. Ship faster, get customers using your features, get feature feedback, and then make your product better. It just is a cycle that keeps spinning. As technology leaders, we should ask ourselves, what can I do to ship the most basic MVP and get early feedback from those customers? What logging and processes should I put in place to help understand how my customers are using the products that I'm building? And finally, how can I ship faster? What steps can we do to reduce the friction in our deployment process and deliver those features to market faster? This is why I really love continuous integration and continuous deployment frameworks, CI/CD. A lot of my early career, I spent time doing release planning and release rotations. We spent time planning what features went together and what would make up the release. We planned out how we would test each of the features, both independently as well as how all of the features would be tested together. And we'd be monitoring to make sure that nothing broke one of the other features that already existed. More often than not, we did have to debug which feature did break something and wasted a lot of time. There is no flywheel to big releases. Every release needs to start up that wheel again, build momentum, and then it slams to a stop when you ship. When I first moved to my first fully autonomous CI/CD team, I was amazed. Teams were shipping constantly without any coordination from upper leadership. I personally saved so much time not babysitting releases, and my team did as well. And instances were actually smaller and less frequent. I slept better than any other job, and I got fewer pages in the middle of the night. As our products got deployed faster, they got better faster. We could ship more frequently, learn, and make better product improvements. It's really amazing to see the flywheel in action. Second feedback loop is customer feedback loops. If you think of your favorite company or brand, they are probably a customer-obsessed company. Customer feedback is so important to building a successful company. Last year during the holidays, 2 of the executives at Shopify tweeted out questions for our merchants. One asked, what brands could we be helping step up their retail game? Email me directly. Another asks, what's your biggest pain point about Shopify? What can we fix right now to make your life better? Both of these got hundreds of responses and showed different styles of asking the same relentless questions. How can we be better? How are you using our products? And what more can we do? The Shopify mission is to make commerce better for everyone and to make it easier for entrepreneurs to run, scale, and start businesses. We want commerce to be possible for everyone, and we want to hear when it's not working. But customers also know when you're being fake. If you ask for feedback and you don't listen, it can be frustrating. How many times have you called up a customer support hotline and been asked by an automated system to enter in your information, and then only when you finally get a human on the line get asked to enter the same information again? It's really frustrating, and you lose trust and confidence in wanting to ever share information with that system again. If you want to build a great product, you need to build customer empathy into all of your teams. It's not just the product manager's responsibility to talk to customers, but it's everyone's responsibility. One way that we build customer empathy at Shopify is that we have every new hire go through a week of customer support training. They go and use and get trained on all of our product features. They listen to customer support calls. And then by the end of the week, they're responding to real customer emails through our ticket system. After that week of training, not only did I have a better appreciation of the products and customer needs, I had a real desire to fix the issues that were impacting our merchants. Figuring out how you can get your tech team to interact directly with your customers is the best way to get that customer feedback back into your product and build that flywheel of feedback that just keeps spinning. The third feedback loop is team feedback loops. High-performing teams thrive on feedback. They are always asking what is going well and what could we be doing better. 2 of the best tools for feedback within tech teams are retrospectives and blameless postmortems. I'm going to start with retrospectives. Retrospectives are set-aside times to reflect on the previous product launches and initiatives. It's an important time to step back from the day-to-day and think about what's working and what we could be doing better to continually improve. Great teams don't wait until everything falls apart to have these meetings. They're constantly checking in and asking questions and making tweaks. These meetings, they don't need to be long and they don't need to have a lot of prep. There are lots of different formats. It's not a one-size-fits-all, but my favorite is the start, stop, and continue. You ask everyone, what's the one thing that you would want to start trying? What's something different that we could try to do to make things better? You then ask, stop. What should we stop doing? What's not working? What is irritating and not giving us the value that we need? And then 3, continue. What should we continue doing? What is working and that we want to make sure that we double down on? The most important thing is to have the team pick one thing to do differently after the retrospective. If you pick too many, teams will most likely not make progress on many of them and get really frustrated. And if you don't pick any, well then what's the point of having the meeting at all? It's just a waste of time. Why talk about things if you're not going to really improve them? If you have a new team or a team that hasn't done retrospectives before, they might feel awkward and it may be hard to get these started. But after you have a pattern of them, you start to build momentum. They get easier and easier to do, and they're more and more helpful for the team. The second team feedback loop are blameless postmortems. If you deploy software, you're going to ship bugs. Hopefully these are small, they're quickly identified and easily fixable, but I'm sure all of you listening have been part of an incident or disruption that wasn't small and did have a significant impact on customers or your business. When you're in the middle of an incident, you and the team need to be focused on resolving the incident. But after the incident resolved, you need to analyze what happened to determine how you can avoid having the same thing happen again. There are 2 pieces of blameless postmortems, the forensics and the analysis. For forensics, you want a timeline of all the activities that happened leading up to the issue. What are where are the logs, the code changes, the team discussions? During the incident's not the time to get into the why, but you do want to be recording your Slack messages, your manual commands, your code deployment changes so that you can look at them later or even roll back if necessary. After you resolve the issue, the team needs to be given time to look into the issue and evaluate all the data that you have. That second piece of the postmortem is the analysis. It's my favorite part, the part of getting the team together to have a meeting and discuss what really happened. The most important rule for this meeting is no finger pointing and no naming names. You need to be able to go deep and not just look at the surface area of the problem, but lots of the different people in the room might have different pieces of the puzzles that you want to fit together. What caused the issue and what are the systems and process gaps that you can contribute? I remember one team retro where that I led where every single person in the room stepped up and owned up to responsibility. One of the developers said, I totally missed this edge case when I was coding it. Another said, I missed it too when I was doing the code review. A QA engineer said, I missed it in my test plan and all the automation tests. And a product manager said, I missed it during our product demos and the product user stories. It's important to remember no one works in isolation, and this meeting made it really clear how we all have important roles. Instead of being defensive and blaming someone else, the whole team took responsibility, and they were committed in not just making improvements, but not making the same mistake again. I once had another team that had a significant incident impacting a vendor system. At first, it looked like the incident could have millions of dollars impacted. However, we were able to recover all the money just with weeks of manual labor, both from our partner team and with our vendors. It was quite serious, and I attended a postmortem meeting. I opened up the meeting as I always do, saying, the purpose of this meeting is not to point fingers or to get anyone fired. The purpose is learning. We want to understand what happened and why so that we never have this incident happen again. Years later, an engineer shared with me that meeting was one of his most memorable from the company. He was a new employee, and although he hadn't been the main actor in the incident, he was terrified of going into the meeting and getting fired. He used that story to teach other new employees about how to analyze incidents and why it was such an important part of our culture. That team improved greatly the quality and robustness of their systems, and they never had the same incident again. The final area I'm going to talk about is individual feedback. One of the best ways to reinforce the feedback flywheel across your organization is to teach people how to give and receive individual feedback. We all want and we need feedback to grow, but it can be hard to give it. Many people are taught to give feedback in a shit sandwich way. I'm sure you've heard of this concept. First, you start out with some positive feedback to build someone up. Then you layer on the real feedback, the meaty stuff that you wanted to say. And finally, you add another layer of bread on top, the nice feedback to build them back up before they leave. The problem with this is that it's easy to lose the important thing that you wanted to say. It's really not relevant when you're smushing together content that's not related to each other. People may miss the thing you wanted to say, or they may devalue the positive feedback that you really do believe, but that people thought you might be trying to just say to build them up when you really wanted to tell them about the corrective feedback that you were sharing. At Stitch Fix, we taught all our new hires how to give and receive feedback on their first day at the company during our new hire training, because it was an important part of our culture. We gave them told them focus on three things. Make it clear, personable, and actionable. So first, you would lay out the problem that you saw directly, not through third parties, not through hearsay, but the way I recently experienced you was this. And then you would explain how that made you personally feel. What feelings did you have? That made me feel this way. And finally, give them some suggestions about how they could be better. Something you could do to improve is this. Those three steps really, they don't need to be super stiff and formal, but they really give people a framework for how to give feedback. Whether you're giving positive affirming feedback or you're giving negative constructive feedback, you can give low quality feedback or high quality feedback, and you want to aim for high quality feedback. Let me give you examples of low quality feedback. Low quality feedback could be saying, great job on this presentation, or presenting, it's just not your thing. I know you liked or you didn't like my presentation, but I don't know why or what I could do different. Examples of high feedback might be, I loved your presentation today. All of your stories were so memorable and really resonated with me. You should continue giving stories in your presentations. Or if you're giving corrective feedback, you might say, I watched your presentation today, but I really had a hard time following the content. I think if you added more examples in your presentation, it would help people connect better to the material. For both of these pieces of feedback, I know more about why and what I could stop or start doing in the future to make things better. So that's what having a great culture of feedback looks like. But many of us have seen cultures where cultures of feedback go wrong. So how can you avoid creating a toxic feedback culture within your organization? I think the most important thing to remember is that feedback is a gift, and it should be given in service of the receiver. If you are pissed off at someone and want to dump everything that they did wrong, stop. Take a deep breath, walk around the block. Feedback given out of anger or malice isn't helpful feedback, and it's not a gift. I remember one time receiving an angry email from a peer who I respected and thought we had a good relationship with, criticizing both me and my team. When I read the email, I saw red. I was so upset, and I just wanted to write a pissy email back, going point by point on where he was wrong on the email. But I didn't. I took a walk around the block, and then I went around the block again and again, until I was finally calm enough to send him a note and ask him to meet with me. I opened up the meeting and said, hey, I think we have a good relationship, and I really want to work with you on this, but your note made me really angry. I want to listen and figure out what's wrong, though. And he shared with me a couple of things that had happened to set him off and caused him to write the note. And then we talked about the issues. There were some real issues between our team, I won't lie. But what we learned was they weren't one-sided and they weren't unfixable. By remembering that feedback is in service of the receiver, we were able to improve things both for our team as well as our relationship with each other. Feedback is a flywheel. Feedback is so powerful. It's part of every flywheel in successful companies, but it also stands alone as its own flywheel. Ask for feedback, apply that feedback, and then you can generate more feedback. And you can keep asking and receiving and let the flywheel spin. Going back to my first story about swimming, the more I asked for feedback and applied that feedback, the more interested my coaches were in generating and giving me feedback. This is true for every flywheel of feedback. The more you practice asking for and receiving feedback, the more people will share feedback and even pay attention to generate more feedback. It gets easier and easier the more you do it. When you ask your engineers to give and receive personal feedback, they start to look for feedback within the team. They start to ask for feedback from their customers. They start to look for it across the organization. Creating a strong culture of feedback can transform your teams and your organizations. This is obviously a topic that I'm very passionate about, and so I want to hear your feedback. I'm looking forward to having the Q&A where we can talk more about this topic. What really resonated with you about this topic? What didn't? How are you seeing feedback culture show up in your organization? And what questions do you have about the flywheel effect of feedback? Thank you very much.
And now we have Cathy here. Hi, Cathy.
Hi, so great to be here.
Yeah, I first of all, absolutely resonate with the notion that feedback is like a critical gift that you get that can enable so many wonderful things. It's funny how early on in our career, so many of us can take feedback somewhat personally. And I think a few years ago, maybe like 10 years ago, someone told me, that feedback is more about the person giving the feedback and their experience as opposed to about you. And once you kind of realize that and take things less personally, I find that it's easier to receive the feedback. So something to call out.
Absolutely. I think it can be really awkward and a lot of people aren't used to it, but I do think having that feedback loop early in my swimming career just really helped me think about it differently when I got into the corporate world.
100%. Like the swimming story, I could relate to. I got out of actually a long relationship and went on a date and asked for feedback from a date after the date that didn't go well. Absolutely, like who does that, right? But the reality is, it was actually incredibly valuable. I didn't get a reply for 2 days, but then the feedback that I got, I actually became a much better dater. So I guess the point is, feedback is relevant to like all domains, and even if it's not culturally acceptable to ask for it, you'll benefit when you do, right?
Totally.
I love it. So we're going to dive into Q&A. So folks, if you have questions, feel free to ask them in the Q&A tab. This first one's from Bogdan. What if your customers are internal? For example, if a team is building software for internal use, the talk currently focuses on external feedback. How can we use this flywheel feedback model for internal?
In some ways, it's even easier. So I have lots of teams who've built internal tools. And the nice thing about it is you can go sit with the internal customer, watch them use your product, ask them for feedback directly. And so these tips apply whether you have internal or external customers, but I think sometimes you can even double down more with the internal customers.
Isn't it interesting how we think of our internal customers differently than we think of like the external customers? When in reality, like all of them are people, all of them are experiencing challenges and just trying to, buy the thing they want to buy or get the job done that they want to get done. So that completely resonates with me.
Yeah.
This next question from Igor is, how do you deliver feedback to a defensive person?
That's hard. I mean, the thing that I think you have to remember is that the feedback is in service of the recipient. And so if they are not open to feedback, if they're not willing to listen to the feedback, there's not a lot of value in pushing through at a time when they're not ready for it. So I would say that it's important to just have that conversation outright of saying, hey, you seem a little... Are you open to feedback? So I like to ask that. And so sometimes, and frankly, I've been in the situation where someone said, hey, can I give you some feedback? And I'm like, not today. Like, I want your feedback, but I will crumble if you give it to me today. I'm having just one of those days. Can we talk tomorrow? And so I think that can open someone up to feedback. And then I've had these meta conversations of like, hey, I'd like to give you feedback, but you seem resistant to it. Can we talk about that? Are you open to talking about that, about why? And that has been some breakthrough conversations that I've had in my career that build trust between me and someone I've managed or been peers with.
What I appreciate about that is it's like you're taking in the whole person, as opposed to just like a robot delivering whatever, piece of work they're supposed to deliver. But then when you ask if they're receptive to feedback, or you kind of see like, hey, it's looking like, maybe you're not being so receptive, that you're taking in the whole person. I'm reminded of Crucial Conversations, great book, right? And they talk about making it safe, as that first step to be able to make it possible to be able to give feedback. And sometimes folks are defensive because, they don't have that psychological safety, right?
Yeah. I also think modeling it is good. If you see someone not accepting feedback, how can you model it at the team, or model it of you accepting feedback from them or asking for feedback? And sometimes that just helps you create, sometimes seeing that vulnerability can create that trust that people are more welcoming of feedback from themselves.
Totally. Like we all emulate upwards, culture tends to be set from top down. Setting an example is very much a thing, particularly with vulnerability. One of the reasons why I love that like Brene Brown is like now out in the ethos everywhere is like vulnerability is acceptable at the workplace. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Awesome. This next question from Rala. The number of books behind you interested me. Can you recommend top 5 books for engineering managers?
Oh my gosh, there's so many, and I should have my list ready. But I do like Radical Candor and Crucial Conversations. Those are great topics. I recently started a new job, and I always pull First 90 Days off the shelf when I'm starting something new. Thinking in Bets is a book that I read recently that I love, written by Annie Duke, who's a professional poker player, and really thinking about strategy. And yeah, there's so many, but I thought that I would seem a little bit more well-read and intelligent. And I think that my bookshelf has actually freaked out my new team. They were worried that the house will fall down if I move too many books, or the bookshelves are going to collapse. So
I would love to show like my audiobook bookcase in the back, because that's all that I do.
That is much better. It's
in the air.
Space.
This next question from Polin is, so MVP is not equal to scalable product. What approaches can you take to educate/work with other departments like product, sales, and marketing to lay out the roadmap for MVP to production app?
So I would push on that a little bit, because the MVP has to be good enough that you want customers using it. It may not have all the feature set, but it doesn't mean that you can skimp on quality. It doesn't mean that you can skimp on some of the basics that you need. And so I think that is the real crux of it. Of it doesn't mean that you're just pushing a hackathon project out and expecting customers to use it. It's what is the steel thread of this feature that is enough that they'll get to see it in real use, but give us feedback for knowing what's next. And so I'd say that if you are just getting out a hackathon or early idea, don't call it an MVP, call it a prototype. Don't tell your sales team that they're ready to sell it if it's not really being, turned on in your product live for customers. And then I think that I think for enterprise software, it's really important to talk to sales teams about not selling things that are not in the product yet. And so if it's a prototype, if it's just getting customer feedback outside of the product, then they shouldn't be selling it. But if it's really turned on and available, then it's fair game.
I love that you surfaced the difference between MVP and prototype, right? People forget about the V in MVP.
Yes.
And then that relates to like the hypothesis you're testing, et cetera. Yeah. So great point. Yeah. This next question from Chris is 360 feedback formally versus small and continuous feedback. Any opinion on doing both?
Small and continuous feedback for the win. Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that I like doing some more formal feedback is if to catch people not giving the more continuous feedback. I'd say I have had teams that said that they gave feedback, but there were managers or individuals who just slipped through the cracks. And so that's something that I try to think about is like, how do you create the culture of continuous feedback and small snippets of feedback? But what happens if people really aren't listening to it? Or what happens if people are just not getting it? And so can you do some formal things that kind of bridge those gaps that, like make sure that you don't have folks missing out?
There's something to be said about like carving out space to really consciously take the time and think about it, because as you were actually relating to in your talk, right? For some folks, like feedback it's part of the culture, it's a thing, and for others it's not. So yeah. At least carving out time and space for those for whom it's not can be helpful.
Most people though are not getting it enough. And so I'd say that you shouldn't wait for the feedback. You should be asking for it, because it's hard to get enough of it.
Sure. This next question from Akhilesh, should engineering/tech teams directly talk to customers for product feedback? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. Anything that you can do to get in front of customers, I think is a good idea. So at Shopify, we do it by training people to do customer support tickets and engaging with customers that way. But ask to go to a sales call, ask to talk to customers that are interested in the roadmap. I think anytime you can really get to hear the story of how your customers are using your product, what pain points they have, it just really helps build that empathy and build better products.
It reminds me, right, that sometimes we forget that engineers are driven by emotion just like any other human, right? And viscerally being like, oh, wow, this person is having a horrible experience with the thing I'm building actually might motivate them more.
Yeah. I mean, my first job, I actually worked at Amazon, and they sent everyone to either do customer support emails or work in the warehouse at the holidays. This was decades ago. And the amazing thing is there were more changes in the warehouse tools and customer support tools in January than any other time, because everybody who had worked in different jobs was like, we should fix this. This is easy to fix, and a really frustrating experience. So it goes back to that internal tools thing of if you sit in people's shoes and get to see their work, you'll have more empathy on the things that you should focus on.
Who'd have thunk? This next question from Shriram, how to motivate the team to provide feedback? So many times there's a situation where there's no response.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there are things that you can do consciously or unconsciously that will either encourage or discourage feedback. And one of the things is ignoring it. So, if you have a retrospective, if you have a forum for people to give feedback or surveys and you never listen to it, people will stop giving you feedback. It's just, there's no sense. It's just people feel like it's a waste. It feels like black hole. Why should I bother doing it? And so I think that is really important, is that if you are asking for feedback, you need to have a way to respond. You may not agree with the feedback. I'm not saying that you have to incorporate all the feedback that you hear, but I think just a response saying, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to give me that feedback. let me think about that. Just acknowledging the feedback goes a long way to creating that culture of feedback. And, sometimes you may respond and say, hey, I really gave it some thought. And, here's why here's why we're going to try something different. Will you give that a shot? If you still are having the same problem, let me know. But it just opens the conversation so that people don't feel like they're being completely ignored.
Totally makes sense. We have so many other questions, but only about a minute left. So last question, what do you do if someone doesn't respond well to your feedback? This question from Hari.
Yeah, I think just try to keep the conversation open. There was one time where I gave feedback to someone and I didn't feel like it landed very well. And, I had a conversation later and I was like, hey, I hope I didn't overstep by giving you that feedback. It was with a peer. And they were like, no, that feedback was great. I really appreciated it. I just was having an off day. And so I think it's fair game to just ask, and say like, is there a better way that I could be giving that feedback? Or is there, a better time that I could do it? So I think, we all have our own like stories in our heads, and unless we put it out in the open and ask, we'll never know.
So true. I really appreciate that you're kind of acknowledging the need to have like the meta conversations, if you will, the conversations about how we communicate, and that doesn't happen enough at the workplace. So that's incredibly helpful. Cathy, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and knowledge with us. And
Thank you.
I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Super fun. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.